The vastness of space had never felt so cold. Commander James Drake stared through the viewport of the International Space Station as the enormous shadow passed over Earth's moon. At first, they thought it was an asteroid, but asteroids didn't change direction. Asteroids didn't glow with pulsing blue lights, and asteroids certainly didn't send out smaller craft heading directly toward them. "Everyone to emergency stations," Drake ordered, his voice steadied despite his racing heart. "This is not a drill." The crew scrambled to their positions as the alien vessel approached. It was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything humans had ever built. Before they could even attempt communication, a blinding light flooded the station, and Drake felt his body go numb. When he awoke, he was in a chamber with walls that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. 3 other crew members, Medical Officer Tom Reed, Engineer Maria Bell, and Communications Specialist Jack Foster, lay unconscious nearby. Drake tried to stand but found his limbs unusually heavy. "The specimens are regaining consciousness," a deep voice announced. 4 tall figures entered the chamber. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with gray-blue skin that seemed to shimmer with a metallic quality. Their eyes were large, entirely black, and showed no emotion as they observed the humans. "These are the dominant species," one asked, sounding disappointed. "They are so fragile." Drake remained silent, watching and listening. The aliens, who they would later learn called themselves the Valerians, spoke in perfect English, clearly having studied Earth's communications. "Their skeletal structure is inefficient," another Valerian stated, examining readings on a translucent screen. "Muscle density approximately 1/3 of Valerian standard. Respiratory system primitive. These creatures would not survive a day on any developed world." The tallest Valerian, wearing an ornate collar that suggested authority, stepped closer to Drake. "I am Commander Rix of the Solarian Empire. Your world has been cataloged for integration. Resistance would be inadvisable." "What gives you the right?" Drake asked, finding his voice. The alien tilted his head, as if the question was puzzling. "Right. We have the power. That is all the right we require. Your species will serve a purpose in our empire, as all lesser species do." Over the next few days, Drake and his crew were subjected to various tests. The Valerians were clearly assessing human capabilities and limitations. During these examinations, Drake began noticing patterns. The aliens were strong and technologically advanced, but they were also rigid in their thinking. They followed protocols exactly, never deviating. They seemed genuinely confused when humans responded unpredictably. "They've never faced real resistance," Drake whispered to Reed during a brief moment alone. "Look at how they move, like they've never had to worry about being attacked." Reed nodded. "Their medical technology is incredible, but they don't understand our biology. They keep expressing surprise at our healing rate. From their holding cell, they could see preparations being made. Massive ships were gathering." The Valerians clearly viewed Earth as just another world to add to their collection, and humans as just another species to subjugate. On the 7th day, Drake overheard 2 Valerian scientists talking. "The invasion fleet will depart tomorrow. The Supreme Commander expects minimal resistance. These humans seem intelligent enough to recognize superior force. They will submit." Drake closed his eyes, thinking of Earth, unprepared and unaware of what was coming. But he also thought about human history, filled with underdogs who refused to submit to superior forces. The Valerians had made a critical mistake. They had judged humans solely by their physical attributes. They hadn't accounted for human determination, creativity, or our remarkable ability to unite against common threats. They thought humans were weak. They were about to learn otherwise. Admiral Helen Grant stood before the United Nations Security Council, her face grim as satellite images displayed on the massive screen behind her. Massive alien ships had appeared in Earth's orbit, seemingly out of nowhere. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing an invasion," she said, her voice calm despite the gravity of her words. We have lost contact with the International Space Station. And now, these vessels. Panic erupted in the chamber until the Secretary General banged his gavel. What do we know about their capabilities? Very little, Grant admitted, but we must assume they far exceed our own. As if on cue, communication systems worldwide began broadcasting the same message. People of Earth, we are the Valerian Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration. Surrender your governments. Resistance will only increase casualties. Within hours, the first Valerian ships descended. They targeted major military installations with surgical precision, using weapons that seemed to disintegrate matter itself. The world's militaries responded with everything they had: fighter jets, missiles, tanks, but conventional weapons barely scratched the alien vessels. Admiral Grant watched from the underground command center as reports of defeats poured in from around the globe. "This is hopeless," a general said, his face ashen. "No," Grant replied firmly. "It's just beginning." While the Valerians expected immediate surrender, something unexpected happened. Humans didn't give up. Instead, they adapted. In the mountains of Colorado, a small militia group discovered that the Valerian ground troops, while incredibly strong, moved with predictable patterns. They set simple traps that the aliens walked right into, never expecting such primitive tactics. In Mumbai, engineers found that certain radio frequencies seemed to interfere with Valerian communications. They couldn't stop the aliens, but they could confuse them. Reports of small victories began trickling in. Not enough to turn the tide, but enough to slow the Valerian advance. Meanwhile, in a secure facility beneath the Nevada desert, Dr. Robert Wilson examined tissue samples taken from a fallen Valerian soldier. "Their cellular structure is fascinating," he told Grant over a secure video link. "They're stronger than us in Earth's gravity, but they're also vulnerable in ways we aren't." "Explain," Grant demanded. "Their immune systems are completely unused to Earth's bacteria and viruses, and their respiratory system. It processes oxygen much more efficiently than ours, but it can't filter out certain compounds that are harmless to humans." This information spread to resistance cells worldwide. Guerrilla fighters began using smoke grenades containing compounds that left humans with mild headaches, but sent Valerians into coughing fits. In orbit, the Valerian commander Rix was growing frustrated. What should have been a simple subjugation was turning into a prolonged conflict. "How are these primitives still fighting?" he demanded of his officers. "They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, barely any space capability at all." "They are unpredictable," his science officer replied cautiously. "They use inferior technology in ways we never anticipated." On day 17 of the invasion, the Valerians suffered their first major defeat. A squadron of their ground transport vessels was lured into the Grand Canyon, where hidden missile batteries fired from multiple angles. The ships, designed for open battlefield dominance, couldn't maneuver in the narrow spaces. That same day, resistance fighters in Eastern Europe discovered that Valerian body armor, while impervious to bullets, conducted electricity extraordinarily well. Improvised electrical weapons began disabling Valerian troops across multiple fronts. Commander Rix stared at the battle reports in disbelief. The invasion that should have taken 3 days was now entering its third week with no end in sight. "Order a temporary withdrawal," he finally commanded. "We need to reassess our approach." As the Valerian ships pulled back to higher orbits, humans around the world seized the moment to regroup, share information, and prepare. The invaders had wounded Earth deeply, but they had also made a critical error. They had given humanity time to learn. 6 months had passed since the Valerians retreated to orbit. 6 months of frantic preparation that transformed the face of Earth. Former enemies now worked side by side. Scientists shared discoveries freely across borders. Military forces trained together under a unified command structure headed by Admiral Grant. In a vast underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Captain Mark Miller watched as his Special Forces team practiced with the new weapons. These weren't the crude guns and bombs of before. These were hybrid creations, human ingenuity married to reverse-engineered Valerian technology. Again, Miller ordered as a soldier missed his target. Remember, their armor deflects direct hits. You have to aim for the joint sections. The weapons they trained with had been unimaginable half a year ago. Handheld electromagnetic pulse generators that could disable Valerian tech, sound-based weapons tuned to frequencies that disrupted Valerian neural functions without harming humans, and personal shields that could absorb energy weapon blasts, if only for a few seconds. "Captain Miller," a voice called from the doorway. Dr. Wilson stood there, looking tired but excited. "We've had a breakthrough." Wilson led Miller to his laboratory, where a captured piece of Valerian armor floated in a containment field. "We finally cracked their material science," Wilson explained. "The molecular structure shifts to disperse energy. That's why our weapons couldn't penetrate it. But look what happens when we introduce this compound." He pressed a button, and a fine mist sprayed onto the armor. The metallic surface immediately began to dull. It breaks down the bonding at the molecular level. Their armor becomes brittle within minutes of exposure. Miller smiled for the first time in days. "Mass production already started," Wilson confirmed. "Every frontline unit will have canisters within 2 weeks." Meanwhile, in orbit around Mars, Commander Drake and 3 other crew members huddled in a stolen Valerian scout ship. Their escape from the main fleet had been bold and desperate, taking advantage of a moment when the aliens were distracted by an unusual solar flare. "Signals coming through," Jack Foster said, adjusting the communication device they had modified. "Earth is responding." Admiral Grant's face appeared on the screen, her expression shifting from shock to joy. "Commander Drake, we thought you were dead." "Not yet, Admiral, and we've brought gifts." Drake held up a data crystal, complete schematics of Valerian ships, weapons details, and most importantly, their battle plans. The information Drake's team provided was invaluable. The Valerians operated on strict protocols, attack patterns that were mathematically precise but utterly predictable once you understood the underlying logic. Their tactics hadn't evolved in centuries because they had never needed to change. On Earth, the final preparations for humanity's counterattack were taking shape. Factories around the world had been retooled to produce the new weapons and defensive systems. Ordinary civilians trained alongside soldiers, learning to exploit the weaknesses in Valerian physiology and technology. In the Valerian command ship, Lord Dax, Emperor of the Solarian Empire, received Commander Rix's report with growing irritation. "These humans continue to resist. They should have collapsed months ago." "They are unusual, my lord," Rix replied carefully. "They adapt faster than any species we've encountered. They've even begun modifying our own technology." "Impossible," Dax dismissed. "They are primitive mammals. Their world will be ours, as planned." But even as he spoke, the Emperor felt a flicker of doubt. Reports from intelligence probes showed strange new structures on Earth's surface, defensive installations unlike anything in their records. And their long-range sensors detected unusual energy signatures, suggesting technologies that humans shouldn't possess. On Earth, Admiral Grant addressed the united forces of humanity one final time before the counterattack. "They came here believing we would bow down before superior strength. They judged us by our muscles, not our minds. Today, we show them humanity's true power, our ability to adapt, to innovate, and to overcome." As she spoke, thousands of newly built craft prepared to launch. Operation Prometheus was about to begin. Humanity was going on the offensive. The darkness of space lit up with unexpected fury as Operation Prometheus began. Thousands of small human craft, each barely larger than a fighter jet, swarmed from Earth's atmosphere toward the Valerian fleet. They moved in chaotic patterns that made no sense to the alien observers until it was too late. "Defensive positions," Commander Rix shouted as alarms blared throughout the Valerian command ship. "All vessels engage." The Valerians expected a head-on assault. Their battle computers predicted the logical attack vectors based on centuries of conquest. But human ships followed no such logic. They darted in seemingly random directions, some acting as decoys, while others slipped past the Valerian front line. Admiral Grant watched from the new Global Defense Headquarters as the battle unfolded on massive holographic displays. First phase successful, her tactical officer reported. Miller's team has penetrated the outer defensive screen. Grant nodded. Tell Wilson to begin Phase 2. Captain Miller's Special Forces team piloted one of the stealthiest ships in the human fleet. While the main attack drew Valerian attention, they slipped behind enemy lines with a crucial mission. Approaching target, Miller's pilot announced. Valerian command vessel dead ahead. Their ship, coated with materials that absorbed Valerian scanning frequencies, drifted toward the massive alien flagship. Using the boarding techniques they had practiced countless times, Miller's team attached to the hull near a maintenance hatch. Remember, Miller told his team as they prepared to breach, "We're not here to fight. Plant the devices and get out." Inside the Valerian ship, confusion reigned. The alien crew had never faced an enemy that fought so unpredictably. Their training focused on overwhelming force against inferior opponents, not adaptive tactics. Meanwhile, in a different sector of space, Dr. Wilson monitored the deployment of his most revolutionary creation. Specialized drones released clouds of engineered microparticles designed to infiltrate Valerian life support systems. Non-lethal payload delivered, Wilson confirmed. Effects should begin in approximately 3 minutes. Throughout the Valerian fleet, warriors suddenly found themselves coughing, disoriented, and weak. The microparticles didn't kill. They simply prevented the aliens' respiratory systems from processing oxygen efficiently. It was like trying to fight while breathing through a wet cloth. Miller's team moved through the Valerian command ship, planting small devices at key junctions. They encountered surprisingly little resistance. Most of the crew was responding to the main attack or struggling with unexplained breathing difficulties. Final device placed. Miller reported back to Earth. Extracting now. As his team raced back to their ship, the devices they had planted began their work, not to destroy, but to broadcast. Every communication system on the Valerian vessel suddenly began transmitting the same message to all ships in their empire. Images and video of Valerian troops being defeated by humans, alongside tactical data showing Earth's unexpected advances. This wasn't just psychological warfare. It was aimed at the other species throughout the Valerian Empire, showing them that the invincible Valerians could be beaten. In a distant sector of the Empire, a mining colony of the Nexians, a physically small species enslaved for their ability to extract rare minerals, watched these transmissions with growing hope. "The myth is broken," their leader whispered. "They can be defeated." Back in the Earth-Moon system, the Valerian fleet was in disarray. Their rigid command structure couldn't adapt to simultaneous threats on multiple fronts. Ships collided as they tried to maintain formation while human vessels darted between them, using Earth's gravity well to execute maneuvers the Valerians considered impossible. In his throne room in the distant imperial capital, Lord Dax watched the battle reports with growing rage. "How is this possible?" he demanded. They were nothing. Weak creatures on a backwater planet. His advisors remained silent, none willing to state the obvious, that they had catastrophically underestimated humanity. As Operation Prometheus concluded its first day, humanity had achieved the impossible. They hadn't defeated the Valerian fleet, but they had fought it to a standstill. More importantly, they had shown the entire empire that the Valerians weren't invincible. The counteroffensive had begun, and it would spread far beyond Earth. News traveled fast across the Valerian Empire, despite desperate attempts to control it. The encrypted broadcasts from Operation Prometheus had reached the farthest corners of conquered space. On 100 worlds, enslaved species watched in stunned silence as the invincible Valerians retreated from Earth's counterattack. On the mining world of Nexus Prime, the small four-armed Nexians gathered in underground caverns, their luminous eyes wide with hope. "If humans can fight back, so can we," said Tarn, their eldest leader, his voice barely above a whisper after decades in the dust-filled mines. The time has come. The Nexians had been the Empire's primary source of fusion fuel for 3 centuries. Their small size and natural resistance to radiation made them perfect for extracting the dangerous materials from deep planetary cores. Now they began sabotaging shipments, contaminating fuel, and causing accidents in processing plants. Across the Empire, similar acts of defiance erupted like scattered flames. On the research world of Talasia, the bird-like Talasians, prized for their scientific minds, but kept in intellectual slavery, began secretly communicating with human scientists. Dr. Wilson received the first transmission during a routine scan for Valerian communications. "Greetings from fellow resistance. We are Talasians. We have technological knowledge to share." Within weeks, the Talasians had provided schematics for improved shield technology and more efficient energy weapons, advances they had developed but hidden from their Valerian masters for decades. Commander Drake, now heading Earth's first diplomatic mission to contact other species, met with Talasian representatives in a secret location in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. "We've waited generations for this moment," the Talasian ambassador said, her feathered crest rising with emotion. "The Valerians believe strength comes only from physical power. They never understood that oppression breeds resistance." Drake nodded. "On Earth, we have a saying: the harder the pressure, the stronger the diamond." Back at the Imperial capital, Lord Dax faced the first open challenge to his rule in living memory. General Vex, commander of the Empire's Eastern Quadrant, stood before the Imperial Council. "We have lost control of 17 mining outposts. Fuel production is down 60%. 3 research facilities have gone dark. And now we receive reports of full rebellion on the agricultural worlds," Vex reported, his tone accusatory. "All because we failed to crush one primitive planet." Lord Dax rose from his throne, towering over the general. "You suggest this is my failure?" "I suggest," Vex replied carefully, "that we have underestimated the threat. These humans spread hope to our subjects, and hope is more dangerous than any weapon." For the first time in its 5,000-year history, the Valerian Empire faced shortages. Military vessels remained docked without fuel. Food supplies dwindled as agricultural worlds reduced shipments. The imperial economy, built on exploitation, began to falter as the exploited found their courage. On Earth, Admiral Grant received updates from across the galaxy as the Alliance network grew. "The Valerians have withdrawn from the Procyon system to deal with rebellions in their core worlds," her intelligence officer reported. "Their supply lines are stretched thin. They're vulnerable." Grant smiled grimly. "Then it's time for Phase 3. Contact Captain Miller." Miller's special forces had been training with Nexian rebels, teaching them Earth's guerrilla tactics while learning about Valerian weaknesses from those who had observed them for centuries. "My people are ready," Tarn told Miller as they finalized plans to liberate the Nexian homeworld. "We may be small, but we are many." In his palace, Lord Dax summoned his council as reports of new rebellions arrived hourly. "How has this happened?" he demanded. "How has one species caused such chaos?" An elderly counselor spoke hesitantly. "Perhaps, my lord, their physical weakness forced them to develop strengths we never needed. They united because they had to. They innovated because they had no choice." Lord Dax stared out at the capital city, watching as unprecedented protests formed in the streets below. "Send every available ship to Earth," he commanded. "Crush the humans, and these rebellions will fade." But even as he gave the order, Lord Dax knew the Empire had already changed irrevocably. The myth of Valerian invincibility was broken, and throughout the galaxy, the oppressed were rising. The grand hall of the Imperial Palace fell silent as Lord Dax entered. Once, his presence would have inspired awe and immediate obedience. Now the eyes of his council held something new: doubt. "The human problem will be solved," Dax announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. I have ordered our entire reserve fleet to Earth. We will make an example of them." From the back of the hall, a voice spoke up. "And who will defend our core worlds while our fleets are away?" General Vex stepped forward, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the palace lights. Around him stood a dozen high-ranking military officers, their expressions grim. "The rebellion has spread to 53 systems," Vex continued. "The Nexians have reclaimed their homeworld. The Talasians have shut down our research facilities. 3 supply depots have been destroyed." He paused. "Our empire is burning, Lord Dax, while you obsess over one planet." "Treason," Dax roared, reaching for his ceremonial blade. But the palace guards did not move to arrest Vex. Instead, they stood aside, their loyalty now uncertain. Across the empire, the breaking point had arrived. The carefully maintained structure of Valerian dominance was crumbling under its own weight. On the liberated world of Nexus Prime, Captain Miller watched as the Nexians dismantled the last Valerian control center. Their small, dexterous hands worked quickly, converting the oppressor's technology to serve their own needs. "Your tactics worked perfectly," Tarn told Miller, his voice filled with wonder. "For centuries, we thought direct confrontation was the only way to fight. You taught us to strike where they are weakest." Miller nodded. "Sometimes the strongest-looking tree has the shallowest roots." His communication device chirped. Admiral Grant's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "Captain, we've received intelligence from our Talasian allies. The Valerian Empire is facing internal collapse. General Vex has moved against Lord Dax." "Civil war?" Miller asked. "Not quite," Grant replied. "More like a very messy transition of power. Either way, it's our opportunity. Prepare your team for the final operation." On Earth, Dr. Wilson worked with Talasian scientists to complete his most ambitious project yet. The massive chamber hummed with energy as final adjustments were made to what they called the Harmony Shield. "If this works," Wilson explained to the visiting Talasian delegation, "it will project a field that disrupts any weapon system based on Valerian technology, without harming organic life." The lead Talasian scientist, her feathers bristling with excitement, added, "It doesn't destroy. It simply creates harmony where they designed discord." Poetry in physics. As these final preparations were made, Commander Drake led a dangerous diplomatic mission. His ship, accompanied by representatives from 7 formerly subjugated species, approached the Valerian homeworld under a flag of truce. "They could simply destroy us," his Nexian advisor warned. Drake shook his head. "They're pragmatists at heart. And right now, pragmatism favors negotiation." In the Imperial Palace, the standoff between Lord Dax and General Vex had reached its climax. The council chamber had divided, with military leaders backing Vex while traditionalists remained loyal to Dax. "You destroy everything we've built over one primitive species," Dax challenged. Vex's response was measured. "That primitive species has done what no other could. They united our enemies against us. They showed that adaptation is stronger than tradition." He looked around the chamber. "They revealed that an empire built solely on strength cannot stand when truly tested." The palace communicator interrupted with urgent news. "Human delegation requesting permission to enter orbit. They claim to have a peace proposal." Lord Dax laughed bitterly. "Peace. They seek our destruction." "Actually," Vex replied, "their terms arrived ahead of them. They don't seek destruction. They seek transformation." He raised his voice to address the entire council. "They offer an end to hostilities if we recognize the independence of all worlds in rebellion and agree to form a new interstellar council where all species have equal voice." Murmurs filled the chamber. Such terms would effectively end the empire as they knew it. Yet the alternative, continuing a losing war on multiple fronts, promised only destruction. Before Dax could respond, warning alarms blared throughout the palace. On the massive holographic display, hundreds of ships appeared in formation. Human vessels alongside Nexian, Talasian, and a dozen other formerly subjugated species. Admiral Grant's voice broadcast across all frequencies. Valerian Empire, your choice is clear. Evolution or extinction. The Empire had reached its breaking point. The Imperial throne room of the Valerians had never hosted aliens before. For thousands of years, other species entered this sacred chamber only as slaves or prisoners. Today, they came as equals. Admiral Grant led the human delegation, her uniform crisp and her expression resolute. Behind her stood Commander Drake, Captain Miller, and Dr. Wilson, the four humans who had shaped the resistance that brought an empire to its knees. Alongside them stood representatives from a dozen formerly subjugated species, the tall, feathered Talasians, the small, nimble Nexians, and others who had joined the alliance. Across from them, General Vex sat upon the imperial throne. Lord Dax was noticeably absent, having been placed under protective custody after his failed attempt to launch a suicidal counterattack against Earth. "This is unprecedented," Vex began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Never before has the Valerian Empire negotiated as anything but the dominant power." "There's a first time for everything," Grant replied evenly. "That's something humans understand well." The negotiations lasted 3 days. Outside the palace, the combined fleet of the Alliance held position, a visible reminder of the new balance of power. The Valerian military, once the most feared force in the galaxy, now stood divided between those loyal to Vex's new vision and those clinging to the old imperial ways. On the final day, as the agreement took shape, Vex asked the question that had troubled him since the first human victory. "How did you do it? You were outnumbered, outgunned, technologically inferior in every way. By all logic, your world should have fallen in days." Dr. Wilson smiled slightly. "You measured strength by the wrong metrics. You saw our physical limitations and assumed weakness. You never considered that those very limitations forced us to develop different kinds of strength. Adaptability," Drake added. "Humans have survived on Earth by adapting to countless challenges. It's in our nature." "And unity," Grant continued. "When truly threatened, humans set aside their differences. We fought countless wars among ourselves, but we unite against outside threats." Vex nodded slowly. "We have been dominant for so long that we forgot how to change. Our strength became our weakness." The document they finally signed was unlike any in galactic history. The Valerian Empire would dissolve, replaced by the Galactic Council of Allied Worlds. Each species would maintain sovereignty over their homeworlds, while sharing technology, resources, and knowledge. The Valerians would retain their territory, but relinquish control over conquered worlds. As the formal ceremony concluded, Captain Miller found himself speaking with Tarn, the Nexian leader. "Will your people truly accept this?" Tarn asked, gesturing toward the Valerian officials. "After they tried to conquer your world." Miller looked thoughtful. "Humans have a complex history of war and peace. We've learned that lasting peace comes not from crushing your enemy, but from creating a world where they no longer need to be your enemy." On the final evening, a grand reception was held in the Imperial Gardens. Species that had once been mortal enemies now conversed, shared food and drink, and began the long process of building trust. Commander Drake found himself walking with General Vex along a quiet path. "There will be resistance," Vex warned. "Many Valerians still believe in the old ways." Drake nodded. "On Earth, we have a saying. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it." As their ships prepared to return to Earth, Admiral Grant took one last look at the Imperial City from orbit. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival had transformed the galaxy. Humanity had not only survived, they had created something new. "Send word to Earth," she told her communications officer. "The treaty is signed. The war is over." Back on Earth, crowds gathered to watch the announcement broadcast globally. Cheers erupted as the news spread. Not only had humanity defended itself, but they had helped liberate dozens of worlds and create a new interstellar community. In schools and homes across Earth, The story would be told for generations, how an empire that thought humans were weak discovered too late that true strength comes in many forms. How adaptability, creativity, and cooperation proved more powerful than brute force and advanced technology. The old empire was gone. In its place stood a new galactic order, founded not on domination but on mutual respect and shared prosperity. And it had all begun because someone had underestimated humanity.